Hi, welcome back to the Resilient Alpha podcast. I'm Marty Secada. We're here in beautiful New York, and today we're thrilled to have Judith Pearson, a seasoned insurance professional in the family office and alternative investment space. I've known Judith for many years. And she's been a speaker at many of our events in the past. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Precision Brokers, LLC, was the family office and trustee liability group leader at Woodruff Sawyer, and has spent a short lifetime shaping this dynamic industry. Judith, it's an honor to have you with us here today.
Thank you so much, Marty. So great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. We don't see enough of each other. So you spent years in the insurance and family office space. Historically, what's been the biggest shift in how ultra high net worth families approach risk management? And how do you see that evolving over the next decade?
So the family office space has generally been handled by personal lines brokers, thinking about property insurance, workers comp, all that kind of stuff. What I see as the shift is families are really commercial businesses. And so really taking a look at, and I come from the management liability perspective and not the traditional property casualty. So it's really understanding their wealth transfer structures and their investment structures to think through how to look at risk and how to manage their risk. Where I see it going is we're all reading about the LA fires and the insurance and et cetera. Where I really see it going is family offices are going to start looking at their insurance more like a commercial enterprise, thinking about what kind of risk they want to retain, how they want to transfer that risk. I mean, think about some of these billion-dollar families. They have more assets than some of the insurance companies that are insuring them. So it's a much more thoughtful and intentional approach. What I've seen right now, and this is part of my concern and what I talk to my families about, is on the personal line side, for example, let's talk the LA fires. What happens if they chose not to insure, or they had limited insurance, and now there's a house that they have to rebuild, and the beneficiary wants, say, $20 million to rebuild whatever they're going to do. A, do they have liquidity in the trust? B, do they have liquidity in the family office? C, the trustee has to make a decision on, is that in the best interest of that beneficiary? So it's tricky. It's not as straightforward. So I have no issues about families taking on more risk. Just be more intentional about it.
Sure. I'll give you a couple of examples that we've seen because we've been in the family office space so long. But, somebody came to us once who was a family office manager, and she said, well, a lot of these guys in Silicon Valley, for example, they go from, driving Volkswagens and having 2-bedroom apartments in San Francisco to having these massive mansions in Los Altos. And then they're throwing parties for nonprofits. And people are saying, well, did you get insurance for your mansion to do all this? I mean, there's a lot of questions around that. And then when it comes to the Palisades fires, people bought these houses 20, 30 years ago. They skyrocketed in value, right? And so I guess a lot of questions around that is like, you kind of graduated into something that's far more valuable than you purchased it at. And did you really, did you actively look at your portfolio? So, I mean, I guess you're talking about being more active as well as being holistic.
Yeah, and thinking about it and not just looking at it as a cost and looking at it from a true risk management. Everything the family owns, whether it be the investments, the personal property, the alternative asset classes, these all need to be thought about as a portfolio. And they want to balance that portfolio. And they need to look at risk as that portfolio. Like you would never, buy a company and not have some protection around it, right? Why wouldn't you do the same thing for all of your assets?
If you're a private equity manager, why wouldn't you have to, it would be malfeasance not to,
exactly.
Insure and look at your portfolio on a risk management basis. So you're saying take the same approach.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Great. So let's talk about alternative investments. They've exploded in popularity actually since before 2008. Hedge funds were massive. And then you've got private equity and venture capital and aspects of real estate have been reclassified. And then you have all these digital assets, and you've got, all kinds of things like alternative approaches to art lending, Bitcoin, fractionalized assets. From your perspective, how has insurance adapted to cover these complex assets? And what new strategies might emerge as alternative growth further?
So I see it as a cycle, and it's always a cycle, no matter what the alternative asset is. First, things are coming out of the market. You've got creative insurance professionals saying, how can we insure it? There usually isn't enough bandwidth in the beginning, so maybe you can get a carrier to provide some coverage. It's usually expensive, it's not really great. And then more people get into the space. And now the insurance companies can start spreading their risk, and they're more willing to look at things, and then the claims come in. And the example I like to use is on the cryptocurrencies, when the exchanges started failing. Now you had the legal system looking at some of the questions. Example, who has what custody? So once the legal framework comes in,
Yep.
you can start really having a more thoughtful approach to what needs to be insured, what can't you insure, and what does the price basis look like?
Right. I never even thought about the custody issue. It's very interesting, right? So let's talk about technology. Since technology has always disrupted industries, Industrial Revolution, .com. How is InsurTech reshaping family office insurance landscape today?
So I don't think that InsurTech has really solved much of the family office space yet. And it's a yet. So we've seen really good success in some of the personal lines type products. You think of Lemonade and some of those other things that
Right.
are
Okay.
starting to use the InsurTech. Cyber liability is a great example where they've really tried to manage risk in addition to transferring risk. In the family office space, there are a lot of platforms that are helping that we see up and coming that are helping the families understand their portfolios, but I think there's a long way to go. And in terms of really managing risk, in order for the InsurTech to work, you need data. And so much of the data in the family office space, especially from a claims perspective, is hard to get. It's not available. It's confidential. Or some of the families are moving into the directed trust environment, like in South Dakota and Wyoming, et cetera, and litigation gets sealed. So in order to
Wow.
really deal with risk management issues, we need the data, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, I think a lot of people always said there's like data lakes around information. So you're kind of pointing out, I mean, there's stuff that's sealed off. How do you derive the correct, conclusions if you don't have all the data, right? So,
Exactly. Having said that, though, we are starting to employ, I would say, baby AI in some of our underwriting, which is using AI to maybe look at the trust documents to at least help us more quickly and more efficiently get through the underwriting data to then start thinking more about the risk. So it's getting there, but I think it's a bit away.
it sounds to me like there's like two aspects. One is that you have the ability to kind of explain to people why they need insurance and what the repercussions about having it. And the other one is the actual risk assessment, right? And being able to kind of like dive into things and see, where the value add is, where there's higher risk than anticipated. I'll give a great example. We've had a couple of different family offices come into large wealth. One guy bought a yacht that was about 170 feet, and then he was renting it out to people, taking people from LA to San Francisco and back and forth. And then it was such a successful business that he decided to get a second yacht, 190 feet. And then 2008 hit, and maybe he didn't have as much, time to, assess that or drive the business, right? So people don't really consider that buying that yacht or buying a private, like a lot of private planes, they are later on outsourced or used by NetJets or Delta to fly. They fly them back and forth as income producers, right? That data isn't accessible. What happens with those planes or with those boats, right? Or the insurance aspect of it might be covered by that firm. So there's a lot of things that have to be like moving parts, right? And I'm just wondering, what your advice is to family offices that have lots of private assets that they then use to create income. Any thoughts?
Again, that's not necessarily my expertise, but yeah, there's a lot of different risks you have to think about when it's now a third party exposure opposed to a first party exposure, and looking at how that revenue, it's trying to look at business interruption and things like that. Like I said, it's kind of outside of my expertise, but it is really important. But any type of insurance, you need to think through the risk profile. So I do a lot of work with my families on the places that I do have expertise and provide like risk continuums to get them thinking about, if I do it this way, what does the risk look like? And if I do it this way, what does the risk look like? And then I use that discussion to not only help determine what kind of limits, what kind of coverage, but also how to tell the story in the marketplace, because so many of these things are new. And so you have to tell a story in order to get the coverage and get the coverage
Oh,
done
interesting.
right.
Yeah. It's a real balancing act, right?
Mhm.
So historically, wealth has become more globalized. We've had mercantile eras to today's markets, which up until a week ago were pretty borderless, right? So how do family offices adjust their insurance needs given the interconnected world, and then also the turmoil that's happening as well today? What's your vision for the next 5 or 10 years?
So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the large global families
Yes.
opposed to, what we might consider as the ultra high net worth. There's even a bifurcation there. What I'm really seeing is the use of these protected states. I call it the directed trust environment. And again, that's, there's about 6, 7 states that have really good laws for families to think through how to manage their wealth, how to protect their wealth, and how to transfer their wealth.
Okay.
And there's a lot of different structures that give them more control and then give them more privacy and then longevity and how to transfer their wealth. So you're back to the dynasty trust, for example.
Right, dynastic trust, sure.
Yeah. And so every day I see a new structure, and
Really?
every day that is evolving. And it's fascinating how quickly and solidly and how professional it is. And so what I would say is everybody needs to create a team, because we can all ask the right questions. None of us have an answer until the questions are posed, right? I can't tell you how many different projects we're working on when somebody goes, well, what do you think about this? And I'm like,
Oh,
I don't know. Let's think about it. And how do we do it? Or, I have like lawyers going, well, why are we doing it this way? And I'll be like, well, why, and then I'll be thinking, all right, let me look at the law. You're right. We don't have to do it this way. Let's do it that way. So I think it's more about the really incredible professionals in this field that are thinking through how to help the families really professionalize their vehicles.
what states are friendly that you're kind of identifying, or?
So if I can remember them all, right now we see Wyoming, Nevada, South Dakota, Alaska, Tennessee, New Hampshire starting to come up. And I'm actually starting to see a lot of activity in Florida.
Wow.
I think we're going to see a lot more, especially when you think of all the firms that went down to Florida, like Goldman Sachs.
Sure.
So the laws are, really evolving.
They're going to
but
evolve,
yeah.
It's interesting because back in the day, obviously 100 years ago, Massachusetts, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, they were probably more identified with dynastic trust and preserving the wealth of robber barons or whoever. So things changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about natural disasters? I mean, we talked about this, the fires in the Palisades, et cetera, and the impact on insurance, like the Great Fire of London, climate change is accelerating. People have built in areas where there's lots of woods and lots of wind. Thoughts about that? What are proactive steps people can take?
Well, I think it's more about, again, the discussion. There's so many people out there saying, oh, the big bad insurance companies, they canceled all their policies during, the fires. Like, that's all fundamentally not true. There's no business out there who's expected to provide a service and not have some type of a profit. So it's really getting the legislature, the insurance companies, the insurance buyers to understand the dynamics. And again, more intentionality around the risk. Because if you're expecting to transfer all of your risk and not pay for it, that's just not a long-term model that's going to work. So everybody has to get together and say, what are the risks? How are we going to approach it? Let's look at the data. Let's not think it's all fake news, right? And come up with solutions that work for everybody.
I hate to say this, but as a math geek, I started off as an actuary out of the University of Pennsylvania, and because Pennsylvania actually is a big insurance, used to be a big insurance capital, and and shared risk and risk pools has always been a big part of insurance. So when you talk about you've got all these people living in the Palisades, you would expect them all to have taken the precautions to minimize risk. Probably didn't happen, and that happens a lot of places where whether you're in Florida on the Gulf side and you've taken all the risk precautions against that, or you built mini mansions on the water, that's questionable. So it's interesting. We have done a lot of work with DARPA, and DARPA invests lots of money in cybersecurity. And I mean, well, the internet didn't exist until 30 or 40 years ago, right? So cybersecurity is a really new thing for the insurance world. And family offices are often targeted. They underestimate the risks, et cetera. Can you talk about what cyber trends you see happening, and what kind of steps family offices will be able to take with respect to cybersecurity?
So the first thing is, as we all talked about, we know that we as users of data cannot move as quickly as the criminals are, right? I mean, there's so much going on and trying to keep track of it. So the first thing we talk about is education, education, education. I can't tell you how many people have thought we're doing a really good job and then a claim comes in, right? And it's usually a human error, but you have to just be really, you have to do simulated attacks on your networks. You have to get people trained. It's
Wow.
one thing to kind of go, oh yeah, no, I hear about emails. But until you have simulated attacks, you don't know how hard it is to catch them.
And there's companies who do that for you, right? They can assess the quality of your network and everything else, right?
If you are high end, if you've got the money to do it, there's amazing companies out there. Even on the low end, Microsoft's Defender will now do simulated attacks.
Wow.
So the training is getting much easier, much more accessible, but that's not the end of it. But that's the start.
What about the human element? What about your kids posting photos on Pinterest or something like that?
Right. Well, that's where I'm getting to it. So it's all going to come down to the human element. And I don't know. I've always said from the day that cybersecurity or cyber insurance started that there wasn't enough money in the market to cover all the risks. And in the very large companies, they've gotten a handle around it better because of all the big claims. But that's why the high net worth are being attacked, whether it's the family office or the trustees or the folks that are supporting it. I think I read a statistic recently, I think it was the FBI statistics, that the highest growth of attacks is small companies, which is 50 people and below, because they still haven't tightened up all their security. But the next piece of it is, again, everybody asking the questions, because I have to say, even in my world, I didn't have a claim until 2 years ago. And on December 15th, 2 years ago, we had 15 claims.
Wow.
Because there was an attack that everybody was waiting to happen. Now, when that happened, we had to look at it. It's like, oh gosh, what's covered under the policies? I didn't think about third-party coverage. Is it an E&O error? Is it a vendor error? Is the bank responsible? How do we get to the bank to see if we can recoup some of the money? I mean, it's a very complex claim settlement. One of the new trends is the criminals are starting to take control of titles fraudulently of property.
Wow.
Now, is that a covered security? No, we got to change the definition. So as fast as they're coming at us is the fast that we have to start looking at how to manage through it.
We say innovation is really centered in Silicon Valley, but it seems when it comes to the criminal element, it's universal, right? So can we talk about regulation? I mean, the insurance industry is heavily regulated, and from Glass-Steagall to Dodd-Frank, regulation has always been a big part of it. What shift do you see in insurance happening, and how is that going to impact family offices? And I'll give you a great example, and it's not in your domain, but we've been told that insurance in California for real estate will probably no longer cover the cost of rebuilding, but will just give you reimbursement for what you've spent on something, right? So maybe you can talk about where you see insurance going and the impact and how family offices can kind of calculate that into their role.
So I'm actually going to shift it a little bit to, in my world, what I'm seeing as regulation.
Okay.
So if we go back to, 2009, when the SEC wanted to start regulating family offices from a securities perspective,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They got the carve outs and everything was going great. What I see today is the old family office is the new private equity. The new family office is the private trust company. And then trusts are the glue that brings all this together. So, what are we seeing from a regulatory perspective? I think we're going to see higher scrutiny when you think about FinCEN and the Corporate Transparency Act
Okay.
and the reporting aspects of who in the family or the family office or their vendors have to be thinking through about reporting. That's important. If you think about the private trust companies, it used to be that many of the states, not all of them, would recognize unregulated and regulated. Even South Dakota in 2019 stopped recognizing unregulated private trust companies.
Wow.
So the families need to be managing their, I call it corporate governance, but the family governance, as if they're going to be regulated entities.
So I set a trust up 10 or 20 years ago. I feel really comfortable because I had the best law firm in the world do it for me. And they've got great guys and, they've been doing it for years. And all of a sudden, deregulation or re-regulation happens. There's more scrutiny and the composition of my trust gets examined. And so who manages that composition? Does the trust manage it itself? Or does the family manage it? Or does a corporation in the middle? I mean, who's doing that?
It depends.
Uh-oh.
And it depends on how it's structured. So if it's a traditional trust, the trustees' roles and responsibilities are investment, reporting, administration, and distribution. And then they're able to hire professionals to do some of that. Then the directed trust evolved, which the thought was to bifurcate the duties. So now you've got to look at, is it an investment professional doing it? And this is where administrative trust companies started popping up all over the place. And they have a great platform for doing a lot of the administration and reporting, et cetera. And then we started seeing the private trust company, and that's where I'm going to get to answer your question.
Okay.
Because this is like one of the risk continuums that I've created. The first structures that we started seeing was where a family would create a private trust company and outsource most of the services to administrative trust companies, investment professionals, et cetera. And so then it was an entity that was formed, an institutionalization of their independent trust. But as you go up the risk continuum, the families and the private trust companies are taking more of these services and putting them in private trust company, or they're forming the traditional family office, and the family office is then providing those services.
Wow.
So there's a lot to unpack in all of that, but that's part of having an insurance professional understand all these structures, help the families understand where the risk is and how to think through the risk transfer.
So which one do you work with? Do you work with family, the trust company, the trustee, the administrative trust? Which one are you interfacing with?
All three.
Oh my gosh.
So for individual and professional trustees, I have my own underwriting facility backed by Lloyd's of London. Then I kind of look at my silos that I use the outside markets for, and I call them the trust companies, the public trust companies, which are the administrative trust companies, and the private trust companies. And then the last silo is the family office, which I bifurcate into single family, multifamily, and embedded. So think of an operating company that's multi-generational that starts to ask the independent CEO, CFO, legal counsel to start serving in some of these trustee roles. Many of the insurance brokers will say, oh, we'll just add it to the D&O policy.
Wow.
I'm like, no. There's lots of conflict of interest.
Really?
Think about if you're a CEO and you've got one hat on about how you're going to grow the business and look at your stakeholders. And then you have a beneficiary who might not be viewing the capital investment the same way. And so you really have to understand what hat you're wearing when you're making these decisions. So to combine the insurance, it creates all sorts of problems.
I'll give you a great example. for many years, Bridgewater, which is one of the largest hedge funds in the world, they managed Ray Dalio's family office out of Bridgewater. He didn't have a separate entity. I don't know if he has one now, but it gets confusing because you're saying, well, I mean, and that's not, that happens a lot.
Right.
And you see it in a lot of the Midwest a lot.
I see it all over the world.
Yes.
But the real piece is having somebody who understands all of these different structures to figure out the best way to manage that risk and not just go, oh, let's just add it to the family office. Like it's kind of crazy, like how limited some of the insurance professionals are in understanding all of these.
Sure. You know, one of our AI is everywhere. You've got a lot of automation. I know that, you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, with AI, trustees are expected to do less. But I would think that there's not a trustee in the world where a trust was formed 20 years ago who thought they would have the responsibility of AI, right? Who thought that, oh my gosh, you know, what am I going to do with all this technology? What are your thoughts on that? And how does AI impact these trustees and advisors and administrative trusts, et cetera?
Well, I think, first of all, there aren't enough trustees in the world to handle all the trusts that are getting created today.
Wow.
There's a whole new industry popping up, which is called the professional trustee. It might be a retired lawyer, it might be a CPA, it might be a retired trust officer, it might be an individual who has had experience with their own trusts and decided to help others. But the first piece is getting trustees to understand the enormity of their job.
Right.
And how it changes.
Yes.
Like the AI is just like a teeny part of it, because at the end of the day, if we can get the trustees to understand they need to hire professionals to do the things that they shouldn't be doing and only be doing the things that they should be doing, that's where the human element comes in. And you can't most of the claims ultimately happen because of the human element. You know, does somebody feel like they're not being treated correctly? Does somebody think that they ought to grow an asset in one way or not? Let's put it in perspective. I don't know if you guys followed the Murdoch claim, right? So Rupert Murdoch decides that after a trust that had been in place for 20 years, where all 4 of his children had equal voting, that he wanted to change it because he felt that Lachlan, who manages, you know, Fox News, et cetera, aligns with him and believes that by growing the valuation of their corporate assets, that's in the best interest of the beneficiaries. And the other 3 children are saying, well, wait a minute, we don't have that same conservative view. We actually want to deploy our capital in a different way, perhaps impact investing. Wow. So he decided to try and change the trust. And instead of having equal voting rights, everybody kept the shares, but he wanted to change all the voting with Lachlan.
So they created a different class so Lachlan would have control.
Not a different class. They had to change the trust. And the only way you could change the trust is the trust had to make a decision on, is it in the best interest of the beneficiaries to grow the assets in theory and give Lachlan the control, or the other 3 beneficiaries have a different mission, vision, etc. What's the best? So it got
was it litigation?
It got tested in Nevada, which is generally sealed. Somehow some people got information, and as we see right now, the courts have said that they have to keep the trust as it is. All I'm saying is it's a tricky decision.
Right.
I'm not trying to, weigh in on what's right or what's wrong. It's tricky. And trustees have to understand that they're put in a position to make tricky decisions.
Right. I think there was something with the founder of IBM and one of his granddaughters that there was an issue with, right? I mean, these things, and they're so esoteric and so way out there that it's not common language or common knowledge for people to think about it, but an expert like yourself is always what you're thinking about, right? So, So again, I mean, it's 2025, who would believe it, right? And the baby boomers are all retiring, and there's a huge transition of wealth, and a lot of people are saying, great, they're just giving up, and they're selling their companies, et cetera, and their assets. So how do insurers, facilitate all this wealth that's moving towards a younger set of heirs? What do family offices or families need to prioritize with this great wealth transfer that's underway?
Well, I think what's really amazing is when I really started in focusing on this industry, a lot of the conversations were about how do you teach the next generation to be contributing to society, right? They had all this wealth. What were they doing? They're playing. This next generation coming up, they're amazing. They are smart. They're thoughtful. They're using their money with their mission and vision, and they're driving the economy. And so I think it's part of the families having the conversations and putting a structure in place that allows this next generation to take hold and do what they want to do with having the guardrails that when you have, 30, 40, 60 years of experience, you know how to manage some of it. So I think it's going to be really fascinating how it all goes on. But I mean, we have an enormous amount of wealth and people don't care anymore. They're just doing what they want. Like, right? Look at what we have today. Who is running our government, right? It's, people have had an enormous amount of wealth and have a vision of what they want to do. And on a smaller scale, you have younger people who are putting together really interesting investment vehicles within their trust structure.
Part of it is because you can be more creative today, right? I mean, there's more technology out there to kind of help you assess what you can do, what you should be doing, et cetera, right? So that's a conversation for later. So every era has its next big thing. There was railroads and steel and oil and tech and stock and crypto and fractionalized ownership. What's the next big frontier for family offices and alternative investments? And what role does insurance play in kind of serving up a platform that controls the risk around that?
Yeah, again, I'm not the investment professional, but what I can say is what I'm seeing again is the flexibility of the wealth transfer vehicles today in all these wealth transfer environments, that you now have the dynasty trust, you now have multi-generations, that you can create structures to allow the young people to do what they want to do with the guardrails. And like I say, I see the structures changing every day. Like I had one, this now goes back about 2 years ago. I get called and said, all right, one of my clients is creating a Delaware purpose trust because they're raising capital and they're concerned when they get really big whether they're going to get diluted. So they created a separate class of common stock owned by a purpose trust to vote in gated board members to try and keep some semblance of control of the board. And they're like, can you get us D&O insurance? And I'm like, that's not D&O, that's trustee liability.
Wow.
And I had to look at it and really think through what it meant, where the claims could come from. And I actually got my underwriters that back my underwriting facility to let me put insurance on it.
Wow. So it's like uber niche almost. I mean, it's so nuanced.
It is so uber niche and nuanced, but growing. I mean, think about it. What, $103 trillion of wealth is being transferred over the next 20 years. That is changing the complexity of our families in such a great, interesting way.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. So we're going to take a couple-minute break, and then we're going to go to our lightning round, and it's going to be pretty exciting. There's some great questions for you. So,
great. Thank you.
Well, we're back here for the lightning round with Judith Pearson. So we're talking a little bit more about insurance and the applications of family offices. So the world is always changing. It's changing faster than ever. It seems like you're always on the lead. I mean, as long as I've known you, you've always been on the leading edge of insurance, whether it's like crypto or art or things like that. What are the biggest challenges that you face or that family offices face with respect to new approaches on insurance, risk management, and underwriting?
I'll try and do this one in 90 seconds or less, but I kept getting calls about trustee liability insurance. I'm like, 15 years ago, that would have been really easy. So I did a deep dive into what was really going on in the industry. When I realized all the different structures we've been talking about today, I went to the underwriters. I'm like, what are you doing in this space? Like, nothing. I'm like, why? They're, well, because we're thinking about big things like cryptocurrencies. And most insurance brokers don't understand tax, trust, and estate. And I'm like, and none of your policies work. Will you work with me to rewrite all the policies, help you rewrite all your underwriting questions, because none of it makes any sense. And so we've, over the last 10 years, rewrote trustee liability policies, family office policies, private trust company policies, etc. So it's getting to somebody who understands the structure to evolve the insurance structure.
So everything is new.
Everything's new.
Wow. Talking about everything being new, I mean, obviously we probably have the greatest generation of wealthy women who really are approaching the family office space differently. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, when you think about it, 35%, I think, of all the wealth being transferred is into women. And not only is it intergenerational wealth, it's created wealth. Think of how many of the women entrepreneurs and capital raising, organizations that you're working with today. Well, women bring a different look to it, and they bring a different thought process to it. So it's just a different way that we engage and think about it and analyze the risk. So
Wow.
The risk isn't different. It's the thought process that's different. And there are amazing women out there doing amazing things.
Right. And they probably go into far more detail and approach from a different point of view, et cetera. So
I think we get more questions about, have you thought about this? I'm thinking about that. Is this a
wow.
issue for me? Yeah.
And they're going to live longer too.
Yeah.
So there you go. Right. So I mean, obviously, let's talk a little bit about resilience. We've had all these catastrophes happen, and then we had COVID. There was a 2008 crash. Tell a lesson from a past financial crisis that family offices should apply to future-proof their portfolio.
Oh, okay. That.
In 90 seconds or less.
Oh my gosh, I got to think for 90 seconds. I think what we can learn from the crisis is that everything changes, and that we shouldn't let anything sit for years. So for the most part, in the insurance space, everybody puts it to bed, and then they go maybe 3-5 years later, should we look at it again? It needs to be looked at every single year right now, and it needs to be thoughtful. And back to what we were talking about earlier is most of the structures that I work with is, if you're going to take on more risk, you've got to think about the liquidity, because the last thing you want to be doing is selling investments in a down market to cover the risk.
Wow. Right. Yes. So, we had a conversation in another episode with a woman named Elizabeth Cho, and she was talking about AI and the application in healthcare. But I imagine that AI is going to revolutionize things in insurance as well. It's like what electricity did in the 1900s. So what's the biggest way AI will transform the family office approach towards insurance?
I think right now it's doing the efficiency, so that the more we have efficiency, we can devote more to the human things like communication and thought process. And then it's going to be a better analytical tool to understand your portfolio, like we were saying before, whether it's your investment portfolio or your property or something else. So it's the analytical tools today.
Fantastic. Great. So I mean, asset classes keep on emerging, right? From tulip bulbs in the 1600s to NFTs today. You've got all kinds of fractionalized assets. Collectibles are fractionalized. How do family offices, stay agile, assess the risk as they evolve faster? What do you think the approach is? And I think getting back to where you were saying active is better than passive. Maybe 90 seconds or less.
Yeah, I would say active and team approach. And I think the team approach is the most important piece of it. And family offices are really used to bringing in the accountants, the lawyers, etc. Bring in the property casualty insurance professional, because they see a lot across the globe.
Yeah. It's really interesting because a lot of accountants and lawyers are retiring as well. They're part of that same wave that all this expertise is retiring, right? And they're taking trips to Europe or cruises to Alaska. I mean, it's crazy, right? So any bold predictions that for the future in terms of where you see insurance and family office space for 2035?
My biggest prediction is, because the enormity of wealth that's being transferred and being created is the structures in which the families are operating. And truly, I think the biggest, benefit we've seen is this next generation becoming so active, so creative, and brilliant. And so that's going to keep changing everything as they start thinking more about how they want to impact society and through their investments.
Right? There's a lot of different forces at work. There's innovation, and then there's outside forces who can, make innovation not so great. So, well, listen, Judith, great to have you, and we're looking forward to continuing this relationship on into the future. And again, wonderful answers, and we'll be seeing you later.
Thank you so much, Marty. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers.